Hello, and welcome to the Argyle CIO Leadership Forum, CIO Trends and Priorities. My name is Vicki Lynn Brunskill with Argyle. It's great to have everyone joining us today. Just a few housekeeping notes to share with you, and then we'll turn the floor over to our esteemed speaker for this session. We welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. And for those of you who are active on social media, please use the hashtag Argyle Digital and follow us at Argyle Exec Forum. Also, we want to hear from you. So during each session today, we encourage you to submit your questions and comments into the Q&A box on your screen. Thank you everyone again for joining us today. Now let's get started. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Jason Langone, Senior Director, Global AI Business Development at Nutanix. We are so excited to have Jason with us for his thought leadership presentation titled Advancing Workforce Productivity with Generative AI. Welcome, Jason. Over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vicki Lynn. Pleasure to be with everybody today. Again, my name is Jason Langone. I run our AI business here at Nutanix. I was actually a very early employee at Nutanix back in 2011. I was at Nutanix for 8 years. I left thinking the grass was greener. I went to the generative AI startup space for a couple of years, learned a lot, and we'll talk about some of those learnings today in this conversation, and rejoined Nutanix earlier this year to run our AI business. But I would kind of like to start with a little, imagination exercise, if you all will humor me. Imagine there is a long wooden plank lying on the ground in, a lovely park nearby, wherever you live. And at the end of that, long wooden plank lying on the ground is a treasure chest. And inside that treasure chest are employees who work 24 hours a day and don't complain and take days off, are increased productivity, increased profit, maybe a competitive advantage for your business. And this very much is, the promise of generative AI, what it represents for enterprise organizations, whether you're listening to podcasts in the morning, reading reports from Gartner or IDC, very much of what generative AI is delivering are these competitive advantages, increased productivity, increased operational efficiencies. The reality, though, as most people think through this, is this long wooden plank with the treasure chest at the end is maybe a little scary, a little daunting, suspended, maybe 50, 60, 70 stories up, and maybe for good reason. But we'll spend some time today talking about how do you mitigate the perceived risk and the actual risk in exploring and advancing your generative AI journey at your organization. So I will start with a little snippet from Gartner. This was in a report that came out maybe 4 or 5 months ago now. I thought it was great research, and I think some of this is not surprising, where they state that generative AI is now the most commonly deployed AI solution in the enterprise. And they're comparing that with predictive AI, which is, finding anomalies to patterns. But generative AI is now the most commonly deployed AI solution in the enterprise. Again, probably not surprising if you're, scrolling your social feed, or you're scrolling LinkedIn, or you're watching the news or on Reddit, listen to podcasts. It's everywhere. It's hard to avoid. What I do think is interesting through their research, Gartner then goes on to state that quantifying the business value of deploying generative AI is the number one barrier to adoption. And I personally found that a little surprising. It's not a technical challenge. It's not figuring out the right GPUs or the right models. And to me, it was a little reassuring, because when I embarked at that generative AI startup organization, this is something I learned the hard way. It's ultimately, when you're talking to an organization, they have to then present to their board, present to their executive leadership, okay, what is this going to deliver for us? How are we going to measure success of this generative AI project? And to me, this question here is just a really, really good place to start your generative AI conversations internally with your partners, with your colleagues. Hey, what specific business challenge are we trying to overcome? Are we trying to solve with generative AI? Because when you have a specific business challenge in mind, now you can loosely start to begin quantifying the value of overcoming that challenge, whether it's increased output, it's a faster time to market, it's a competitive advantage in winning maybe new contracts for your organization. But you could start to put some numbers behind, okay, we're going to make an investment in this generative AI initiative. We can now start to quantify that value, start to quantify maybe that net present value, the additional free cash flow that this project may deliver our organization. But to me, it all starts with something specific, a specific business challenge. So I would encourage, everyone listening to this to really start here. And it's, again, if you're scrolling LinkedIn like I do, probably way too much, there's a trillion use cases you're going to find, which is interesting. But ultimately, you want something that's going to deliver a positive business outcome and a positive, quantifiable business impact to your organization. I'm sure everyone probably saw this over the summer, several months back, but NVIDIA now is one of the most valuable companies in the world. And again, not surprising probably to anybody. Yes, they're shipping a tremendous amount of GPUs that are delivering the horsepower to serve up these generative AI capabilities. But one of the other reasons why their market cap has skyrocketed, over the last couple of quarters is because enterprises are seeing this quantifiable business value. And it truly is transformative. We're in the very, very early days. But what we're seeing, again, from enterprise organizations implementing generative AI capabilities, and we'll talk about some of those use cases here in a minute, but we're seeing actual transformative value from generative AI, which is one of the reasons why NVIDIA has grown so much in market cap. Not hard to find many real world examples of how folks are seeing value from deploying generative AI capabilities within the enterprise. This is one I saw, again, just scrolling LinkedIn. The CEO of Moderna says, hey, if we had to do this kind of the old fashioned way, pre-generative AI, we might need 100,000 people to do some of these things. And that's a pretty big number. Maybe for your organization, it's an extra 5,000 or 1,000 or 10,000 employees. But this is what generative AI is now doing for organizations. I won't go through all of these examples, but I'll call out a couple just so we're all kind of calibrated to how folks are using generative AI. The first is this notion of a contracts GPT. So, imagine you work at a company and you have the ability to upload a contract for a potential supplier, maybe you're evaluating. And now the artificial intelligence is reading through that contract, comparing it to contracts that your organization has signed and authorized in the past, as well as ones that it has rejected or maybe, put a bunch of red lines through. So it's evaluating that contract within the context of your own organization. And if there need to be red lines, it's calling that out and maybe even suggesting the red lines to make to that potential contract. Again, you can really start to see how generative AI can drive value in just day-to-day kind of administrative tasks, but also something what I think is kind of creative, prepping for earnings calls. Okay, there's a lot of work that goes into that, pulling data, building slides, a creative element, and I thought it was really interesting to hear that Moderna is using generative AI to do everything from contracts, evaluation and analysis to, prepping for earnings calls. So again, you won't find any shortage of examples, in your LinkedIn feed or wherever else you're getting your generative AI news. So let's talk about the most common use cases that we are seeing in the enterprise. Again, I've been back at Nutanix, I think, almost 10 months now. And it's very common to what I was seeing even before I came back. But these couple of use cases that we're going to walk through together represent probably 80 something percent, excuse me, of all of the projects we are involved with, each and every day. The first is this notion of something like ChatGPT. So I want the ability to ask questions to a large language model and get an answer back. I use this capability every day to, give me an agenda for a meeting that's about X, Y, and Z, and it's going to have these types of stakeholders, draft an email, maybe draft an opening to a proposal I'm writing. But what we're seeing are organizations, especially in regulated industries, but organizations want to keep this on-prem. So they want something like ChatGPT, but they want the model, the infrastructure serving up that model, the prompts, the logs, the output to be entirely on-prem. And this is, something commonly referred to as a private GPT. Kind of the next step um, in that use case, a lot of people will start there at the private GPT, but the next step is giving that artificial intelligence the context of your organization. This is something called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. Again, you'll see a trillion different articles and blog posts about this use case or this technology. And the difference here is in private GPT, I'm asking a question to a large language model. I'm getting a probably beautiful and articulate answer back, but it's generic. Whereas when I'm doing a private GPT with my own documents and data, again, called RAG, I'm getting context aware answers back, something specific to my organization or my line of business, even within that organization. As you see here, we see these use cases each and every day. If I'm on 5 or 6, calls with customers every day, 2 or 3 of them are looking to do this immediately. And one of the reasons too is it's high value, relatively low risk, and it's a really good starting point, for most of us on our generative AI journey. A few other use cases we'll talk about. A private copilot for code generation. So imagine you've got a team of developers and they're cranking out code, shipping product, using artificial intelligence to help write code, meaning I type into a prompt, hey, I need a Java function to go do this, and I get, code on the other side thanks to that generative AI capability. Or another way we've seen this used is maybe it's a healthcare organization and they've got a mission critical application, to their business. Maybe it's running, something financial on the back end, and it was written 20 to 30 years ago, maybe in COBOL, in a language that, most up and coming developers probably did not learn in school. You can use a private copilot for code generation, and Codium is probably the most popular one out there that we see. But you could use something like Codium to translate that legacy code and say, all right, explain, these COBOL functions to me. Just explain it to me in English. And now that I understand what it's trying to do, then I could then take that and into that same prompt, now refactor that to Java or Python or whatever your language of choice is. So again, very relevant in organizations that have, some team of developers, whether that's small or, 1,000, 10,000 developers, whatever it might be. Very valuable to those organizations. And then the last use case kind of comes back to one of our initial slides, which was, what specific business challenge are we trying to solve with generative AI? And as long as there's a specific answer and you can start to quantify what that looks like when you overcome that challenge, you may have to build something, whether that's with your own team, whether that's with, a partner like Nutanix or somebody else, but you may have to build a generative AI capability. Typically, we see something like that done with a data robot, a Domino, Databricks, some platform like that. And we'll talk about how that all fits into the Nutanix story here in a minute. But these 4 here represent, 95% of the use cases, we see each and every day. And the top 2 are the overwhelming majority of what we see out in the field. So let's keep on going. So what is AI? We could take this wildly technical, which is fun to do, but to try and remove maybe some of the intimidation of, artificial intelligence, especially for IT personnel, for those that are managing infrastructure, I would really encourage you to view AI as simply software running in containers. If you're at an organization and you're predominantly virtual machines, which kind of the era I came up in when I was a contractor out in the field, know that in the world of AI, it's almost all container based. So, hey, that's an opportunity for some to learn a new technology. But ultimately, AI is just software running in these containers. And yes, that software needs access to GPUs. Today, that's predominantly from NVIDIA, as we spoke about. You need some kind of enterprise Kubernetes management layer to to manage anything at scale. You need, access to storage for structured and unstructured data. You need to have an ability to bring a model into that environment and serve up that model for the applications and the users, to consume. Candidly, those containers or that software running in the containers is running on hardware somewhere. So you need some lifecycle management of the hardware. Not glamorous to talk about, but it is true. And I can tell you, even in the 8, 9 months I've been back at Nutanix, those that start their generative AI journey with a specific challenge and they start to solve that challenge, they very quickly go find other challenges to solve. So this is an environment that will scale out over time and probably faster than environments maybe you're accustomed to. And then the last piece of this puzzle is a really, really important piece. And, I heard a great conversation in Washington, D.C. 2, 3 months ago where a civilian agency was talking about one of the biggest things they had to think through in their adoption of generative AI was personnel. What was the uplift to get their IT organization or the AI team ready to adopt generative AI and operationalize these generative AI capabilities? So one thing it's really important to think through is what are the technologies I'm going to have to learn? Hey, if Kubernetes is new to us, there's a bunch of different options out there. Is one Kubernetes offering more simplified to use? Does it have a lower operational cost to use than another? And again, we'll jump into the Nutanix story here in a moment. What else do I need to understand to be able to support this AI, these generative AI applications running in containers? So thinking through what does that lift look like is a really important part of day two operations and beyond. So, as I'm sure you're well aware, a bunch of different places you could run and build your generative AI capabilities. You could certainly run it up in a public cloud. And from the Nutanix perspective, we support a pure hybrid cloud story. So, I can't say we have any, strong forcing function towards either direction. But what I will say is the majority of organizations are viewing generative AI in the way that the MIT Sloan School of Management is viewing generative AI. And that is that models, the prompts, the logs, the output, it's really, really valuable intellectual property. So even organizations that maybe are very cloud friendly, public cloud friendly, and they're doing a lot of things in the public cloud today, even those organizations are very likely to run their production or some set of their production generative AI capabilities in a private cloud on-prem environment. And I will say again, in the time I've been back at Nutanix and even before I came back, this is something that we came across each and every day, or we come across each and every day as someone saying, look, we realize it's early days of generative AI. We believe in its digital transformation to our organization. We believe that over the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years, those that were early adopters of generative AI are going to have a significant competitive advantage to those that were not early adopters of this technology. And we want to protect that advantage. So again, lots of great articles and data points here, but I do think the Sloan School of Management sums this up really, really well, and that you want absolute control, full visibility. You want to own your artificial intelligence. Great survey that was done. This was probably 3, 4 months ago now. And again, not surprising. If you're in a regulated industry, you're probably running the whole thing on-prem, both the training of models, if you're going to train models, as well as serving up the models and using it in applications, which is known as inferencing. But what might be surprising is those that are heavy public cloud adopters and consumers, those organizations too are going to run some percentage, some significant percentage of their generative AI workloads on-prem as well. So let's talk about options. Let's say you're at an organization, you've started to map out your generative AI projects, maybe for the next 12 months, for the next 18 months, and you have decided for, all or for some percentage of these generative AI, projects that you're going to run it in a private cloud on-prem environment. There are options. You could certainly, kind of roll your own, build out your own multi-tiered architecture where you're buying bare metal servers, you're figuring out your Kubernetes strategy and how you're going to manage that at scale. You're figuring out some third-party, storage platform. You're figuring out how to get the models into this environment in an operationally efficient manner. How do you serve up those models? I will say my experience at Nutanix is anyone who is an existing Nutanix customer or anyone who's really adopted this notion of hyper-converged infrastructure, most of those organizations have abandoned this multi-tiered kind of philosophy years ago when they adopted HCI and they realized that, hey, it's expensive, it's operationally cumbersome to manage these environments. So we wanted something that was fully integrated. But again, you certainly could figure out your own multi-tiered solution and, rock and roll that way, especially if you're, deeply technical organization with, a large AI ML engineering team. The other option that we see out in the market are what are known as GPU appliances. And again, most of these come from, NVIDIA where, hey, they've got the GPUs figured out. They've got some ability to integrate or import a model, serve up that model. You still need to figure out third-party storage. Typically, it's still command line driven or meant for a technical audience, but it's another path that you could certainly go down for your generative AI capabilities. Not surprising. I'm loving what Gartner's saying here, which is if you're going to embrace generative AI, which you should, consider investing in a purpose-built, fully integrated solution. And they call us out by name, our GPT in a box offering, which is something we launched about a year ago to the date, actually, at this point. So again, you've got options. We'll talk about here in a second, how Nutanix differs from what you see on your screen now, but you do have options. So as I mentioned, Nutanix launched our GPT in a box offering just about a year ago. And we looked, at our customers and understood that these organizations were, building out generative AI strategies. There were the components we talked about a few minutes ago. They needed to figure out Kubernetes and storage and, maybe a hypervisor, lifecycle management of the hardware, model serving, all of these things. And we said, you know what? We've already got 90% of this fully integrated in our portfolio. Let's add the enterprise AI component and deliver a fully integrated offering for enterprise organizations to embark on their generative AI journey. So let's take a look at high-level architecture. And again, I'll remind you all that to me, Kubernetes is the foundation here. Kubernetes might be running on hyperconverged infrastructure from Nutanix. The Kubernetes might be running, excuse me, up in AWS or Azure or GCP. Kubernetes might be running on bare metal, but Kubernetes is the foundation layer here. We have a world-class Kubernetes platform called Nutanix Kubernetes Platform that I encourage you to explore, but we support freedom of choice as well. So if you're an OpenShift shop and OpenShift's working for you or Rancher's working for you, or you've rolled your own Kubernetes platform, that's all supported as well. So let's go up 2 layers from Kubernetes and talk about what enterprise organizations are doing. They're doing one of 2 things. They are either deploying off-the-shelf generative AI applications, products, excuse me, like Codium or I don't know, maybe Prion, generative AI capabilities already ready to go. They're containers. You just need a place to run them. Or organizations are building out their capabilities, and that's done typically with a data robot. Maybe it's NVAIE, maybe it's Domino or some other platform. But now there's a new layer of infrastructure that's required in between the Kubernetes layer and these generative AI applications. And I've called that out here. So if you think of what will an enterprise organization need to be successful, to be compliant, to be secure, to have, the ability to scale out in an economical fashion, these are those capabilities represented here. The first is an enterprise model repository. So typically, in my experience, what happens when an organization decides to, start their generative AI journey is they have a specific challenge and they go figure out maybe what model they're going to use for this application. And it's not just, hey, we're going to willy-nilly pick one. Normally, compliance is involved in this decision. The security team is involved in this decision. And legal is involved in this decision from a liability standpoint. So you need within the enterprise, the ability to have centralized command and control over what models are authorized for use. So this notion of an enterprise model repository. You need granular role-based access control. So, maybe Vicky Lynn has access to the Llama 3 model, maybe I do not. Or maybe someone needs their access revoked because they've been doing something they shouldn't do. So you need role-based access control to control, who and what apps have access to the models that you have authorized within your organization. A model is just a file at the end of the day. So you need the ability to serve up that file. And that's what's known as an inference endpoint. So we have an inference endpoint microservice that takes the file or the models that you have authorized within your organization, granted access to some set of users or generative AI applications, and it serves that model up for consumption. And again, maybe something that's not glamorous, but super, super important. How do you operate this whole thing? We stand up, Vicky Lynn and I stand up a generative AI capability today. We high five, we go out after work and have a beer and celebrate, and that's great. The reality is, in a month, in a week, in 3 weeks, the phone's going to ring and someone's going to say, hey, that generative AI application, that private GPT, that chatbot, that copilot is running slow, or we think it's down. Like, what's going on? How quickly can you troubleshoot what's going on in that environment? And it's no longer just CPU and storage performance and virtual networking performance, but now you have to pay attention to GPU consumption. You have to understand what's the latency at from the inference endpoint. And that's what Nutanix brings, and something we're now calling Nutanix Enterprise AI. We deliver an enterprise grade layer between your Kubernetes and your generative AI applications that's giving you control and governance and operational efficiency for your generative AI capabilities. So with that segue, I'm going to attempt to stop sharing here and start sharing over here. And hopefully everyone can see this. So I'll give you a quick little demo, and then we'll kind of close up this session. But again, we're here within the Nutanix Kubernetes platform. We offer freedom of choice. I personally think we deliver a really delightful experience with our own Kubernetes platform. And again, if Kubernetes is a new technology for your organization, you're ultimately going to want to embrace a platform that doesn't have some very high level of lift to get you operationally proficient around Kubernetes. And again, I think that's where our own NKP really shines. But here you can see within our own NKP catalog, you've got the ability to deploy this GPT in a box application or Nutanix Enterprise AI. You click it, you go get yourself a cappuccino, or you go get yourself a tea or a water. You come back to your desk. We've deployed the containers that serve up those capabilities we just talked about. So now we're going to log into Nutanix Enterprise AI, and we're greeted with this dashboard here. So now, again, imagine you're within the IT or the AI team within your organization, and you're going to help support the first generative AI application being deployed. First thing we need to do is deploy a model. So we're going to click within models. You'll see here through our partnership and integration with NVIDIA, through our partnership and integration with Hugging Face, you in a couple of clicks have access to 90+% of the models available on planet Earth. Hugging Face is by far the most popular model hub. NVIDIA's got their own model catalog as well. But we also support the ability to manually upload your own model, whether you trained it yourself, whether you licensed it from some third-party organization, whether you operate in a dark site, maybe you're a federal government agency, law enforcement organization, regulated industry that's disconnected from the internet. We give you, again, that freedom of choice. In this example, we're going to click into the NVIDIA model catalog, and we are going to authorize, Llama 3 for use within our organization. So I don't know, 3 clicks, we have essentially imported the Llama 3 model into this Nutanix environment. Now we have to serve it up. So we're going to go over and create an endpoint. We're going to give it a name. We're going to attach it to some of the GPUs that are in this Nutanix environment. We're going to generate an endpoint access key, and this is the key that's used to allow applications, chatbots to communicate to this model. And as what you see here, there's a couple of different parameters. Through our partnership and integration with Hugging Face in the next iteration of this product, we'll have a recommendation engine incorporated from Hugging Face as well. But today, again, 3, 4 clicks, a couple of parameters, we're now serving up. And maybe most importantly, for some IT organizations, we're doing this all through a user interface, all through a GUI. We're not dropping down to command line and copying and pasting commands that we found on Reddit, and we're hoping that they work or in some support forum. This is all UI driven, and it's meant, kind of our mission here with Nutanix Enterprise AI is to empower IT to say yes to the business when they come to them and say, hey, we really want to get started with generative AI. Yes, we can do this together. Now I'm in a dashboard, my endpoint's deployed. I can start to see telemetry around that. Again, it's one thing to stand up the application. That's fun. That's important. But now that generative AI capability needs to be maintained, and you need to keep it, performing well for the next 3, 5, 7 years. So here within that dashboard, you have the ability to dive in deep and understand what the performance is, whether it's from the GPUs, whether it's from the inference endpoint. And another interesting concept that I'm going to steal from some of our customers now is they said, hey, we can see what's going on within our entire organization here. And that's a really good point. So yes, Llama 3 in this example was authorized for use within this organization. The reality is they might serve up Llama 3 with an endpoint for HR, with an endpoint for accounting, with an endpoint for finance, with an endpoint for IT, logistics, manufacturing. They may all have their own endpoints, which is fine. And now within the dashboard, the CIO or the head of digital transformation can look and understand within each line of business, what's the generative AI adoption rate? How much are they using these generative AI capabilities that we're giving to them? And one of the things we've started to see is, I'll give an example. HR is consuming a ton of generative AI. They're making a lot of requests to the model, but accounting is not. Sometimes that's a technical reason. Hey, maybe the experience of the application is better within HR than it is for accounting. But what we're seeing is a lot of times it's the soft skills, it's the people, engagement. It's having lunch and learns. It's having a feedback loop available so that people, as they're using it, can make suggestions. And maybe HR did that better than accounting. So having this holistic view of how generative AI is being consumed within the enterprise organization, to me, is a really strategic kind of perspective. As again, this is early days, but we all understand that this is transformative to the business. So we want to make sure as we're serving up these capabilities that maybe we're learning from HR. Maybe they have figured out how to really tap into their employees and get them excited about, consuming and using generative AI to enhance their day-to-day work, whereas maybe accounting could learn from what HR is doing. So with that, I'm going to, in that, the rest of that example, we're just plumbing it back over. In that case, it was for Data Robot, which is one of our strategic partners. So let's see if I can get back to the slides now as we start to wrap and share. So kind of leave you all with maybe this thought from EY. They had a report that they put together about the impact of generative AI. And if I was to distill the report down, they essentially said non-generative AI initiatives typically return linear value, and it's represented, I think, in this orange line here. Whereas generative AI is creating and delivering exponential value. And what that means is if you take two companies, company A and company B, and company A embraces and adopts generative AI today, but company B waits 6 months. Company B is not just 6 months behind company A. They might be a year and a half, 2.25 years behind because of that exponential value curve that we see here, but also because of the learnings that are going on just from adopting generative AI. And maybe all of a sudden it's been a forcing function and they're becoming more comfortable with with Kubernetes. Maybe it's changed and modernized how they operate because generative AI has some, unique requirements as we've kind of spoken about here. Maybe it's changed the way in which the organization communicates. A lot of those specific business challenges that we talked about are going to come out of the lines of business, not within IT. So now maybe the IT leaders are talking even more with those lines of business leaders. So there's just a ton of value here, which is why, I certainly encourage everyone to find that specific challenge, get started. Feel free to reach out to Nutanix. We're happy to help. Again, we've been involved in some, a lot of great projects, some pretty exotic generative AI projects as well. Here's a QR code that'll take you to the guided demo that I kind of clicked through very quickly a few moments ago. And maybe with that, Vicky Lynn, as we kind of wrap here, maybe we open it up to some Q&A, if that's okay with you.
Thank you so much, Jason. What an excellent and practical thought leadership presentation. I think we have time for one question. So I'm going to
Okay.
ask you one of the questions that's come in, and anything else that comes in, I'll make sure that we get it over to you. The question is, what business outcome or operational value have you seen companies achieve with AI?
Lots of great examples or some good examples on our website. Maybe the one that stands out to me the most is, an organization that's running a private co-pilot for their developers on Nutanix. I'll round up, has now 40% of the code that's being written by that organization is now being generated by artificial intelligence. I think the number is like 37 point something, but somewhere around a third or more of that code is now being generated by artificial intelligence, which allows them to get to market faster and hopefully beat their competition. So to me, that's one that stands out for sure.
Thank you so much. I'm so sad that we're out of time. We could have gone on for lots of good questions. So I want to thank everyone. Thank you again. And then thank everyone for joining us for this session today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. And as a reminder, please do check out the prizes and raffle rules section to see how you can earn points for the chance to win a prize. And our next session will begin at 3:15 p.m. Eastern Time, and that will be a keynote presentation titled Network Automation Trends and Their Strategic Importance. Please click the join button that will appear on your screen to be redirected to the next session. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you again, Jason.
Thank you so much.